Hello world, it's Austin. Let's talk about being transgender and Christian. So a few weeks ago, I did a question and answer video, and it was really fun. You guys all asked me a bunch of questions, and it was great. There was one question that I didn't get a chance to answer because I wanted to talk about it in more length. So let's talk about that question today. Jonathan wrote in and said, many insurance policies require diagnoses of things like gender dysphoria before prescribing hormones to transgender people. How do we address this in a way that reduces stigma? In other words, I see people in my church setting saying things like, well, maybe being trans isn't a mental illness, but they do have to be diagnosed with gender dysphoria, so... This is a really important point. How do we distinguish between an illness and a natural expression of diversity, especially if that diversity can sometimes be treated like an illness? And more than that, how should we as Christians be working to fight the stigma that is associated with mental illness? Well, okay, one thing at a time. So first of all, say that being transgender is somehow a mental illness, right? If that was true, does that give Christians license to discriminate against trans people because of that mental illness? How do we treat people with mental illness in our communities and in our churches? How do we treat people with depression and anxiety and post-traumatic stress disorder and eating disorders and bipolar disorders and schizophrenia? How do we treat people? The book of James chapter 2 gives us a really good example of how we should not discriminate against people in our communities. Let's just take a look at this. Verses 2 through 4 say, for if a person with gold rings and in fine clothes comes into your assembly, and if a poor person in dirty clothes also comes in, and you take notice of the one wearing the fine clothes and say, have a seat here, please, while to the one who is poor you say, stand here, or sit at my feet. Have you not made distinctions among yourselves and become judges with evil thoughts? So what's the difference, I'd like to know, in judging people and treating them differently for things that we can see, like clothes and material possessions, versus treating them differently for things we can't see, like mental illness? Does your community have support and resources available for the people within your church that suffer from mental illness? Or do we just take the people that are suffering from things we don't want to deal with or that we can't see and say, go stand over there and don't talk about it, we don't want to hear about it? Let's keep pondering this, okay? When we talk about transgender identities, though, I'm going to be totally upfront with you and tell you that I don't think it has anything to do with mental illness. Let's use another issue that's less fraught with moral tension to try to understand this, okay? So let's think about people with less than 20/20 vision, so people who have an astigmatism or are nearsighted or farsighted. Say that one day you're sitting in class and you realize that you can't read the words on the whiteboard because they're a little bit blurry. You might go to an eye doctor, right? And the eye doctor might give you a diagnosis to tell you what's wrong and then give you a prescription for glasses or contacts. Now, unless we're talking about 4th grade bullies, nobody is going to make you feel inferior for wearing glasses. Right? Nobody's going to try to go back into your past or figure out what happened to you or what your moral failing is that makes you have less than perfect vision. We can recognize that that's just the way the world is. Some people see clearer than other people, right? But in order to get glasses so that you can see the whiteboard and read it, you have to get a diagnosis and a prescription. So does getting a medical diagnosis from your doctor mean that there's something wrong with you? Some Christians argue that the reason why there are bad things in the world and the reason why we have illness and death is because of original sin. So some Christians might say, yes, original sin has physically affected somebody who does not have perfect vision, and that is why they can't see things clearly, right? Original sin is all about a fall from a state of perfection. But here's the thing, there is no such thing as perfect vision. Okay, I hear you yelling at me already. Yes, there is such a thing as 20/20 vision, but that is not perfect vision. 20/20 vision is actually what we call normal visual acuity, which basically means the eyesight standard that we think is most common among the most humans. People can have better than 20/20 vision, and we can have worse than 20/20 vision. And when we move outside humans, there are animals in the world that can see colors and light spectrums that we can't see at all. So does that mean that they actually have the perfect vision, and that's what we should be aspiring to? How do we measure what is perfect, what is normal, and what is inferior? Basically, based on the averages that scientists and doctors have observed over time, we make it up. So here's what I'm arguing. The exact same thing can be said about our ideas about physical sex and gender. Here on Earth, there is no perfect expression of physical sex, and there is no perfect expression of gender. We know there isn't just one or two kinds of physical sex because intersex people exist along a whole spectrum, and people's physical bodies exist along a whole spectrum. We know there's not a single way of being male or female or both or neither because we have gender expressions that are as various as the people that live on this planet. What we've done is create medical systems where people who don't fit that 2020 norm, whether they're trans or intersex or whatever, are treated as inferior because they don't fit our made-up system. And for transgender people, we are now required to get a medical diagnosis so that we can live happily and healthily in our bodies, just like you would get a prescription so that you can see the whiteboard clearly. The only real difference is that we don't consider people with glasses or contacts to be morally or intellectually inferior. So yes, trans folks may choose to go to the doctor, and we may choose to get a diagnosis and a prescription to help us live healthily in our bodies, but that in no way means that we are crazy or worth less than anyone else or mentally ill or anything like that. We're all just trying to do our best with what God has already given us, right? So next time we meet in line at the pharmacy or the eye doctor's or the dentist's office or wherever, let's all agree not to judge each other and treat each other as inferior, because we're all just trying to take good care of ourselves, right? Thanks for watching the video, everybody. If you have more questions, you can put them in the comments below or get at me on Twitter. That's really the place where I am most active, so find me there. Hit the subscribe button, and I will see you back here next Wednesday. Peace.